Welcome to the Work, Wealth, and Travel podcast. I'm your host, Nicole, and this podcast is your guide to start creating a lifestyle by design. From entrepreneurship, money and finance, tax optimization and residencies, and everything in between, this show highlights the nuances of a true global citizen lifestyle. Let's dive in. Welcome back to the podcast. And in today's episode, I sit down with Dr. John. Now, this is a really interesting episode, and we're going to have more episodes similar to this in the future because not only are we diving into globalization options, how you can become a diversified global citizen, but how you can also become your best self and your peak entrepreneur self for your peak performance. And of course, a large part of that is your health and your wellness and really being informed of what you should and should not be doing, and potentially even pushing some traditional medical science norms and critically thinking about whether or not they work for your life. And to me, this is so important: biohacking, optimizing your health, really finding what works best for you, and optimizing your wellness so that you can be the best entrepreneur that you can be. And then from there, go on to optimize your global diversification and your taxes. So, in today's episode, I sit down with Dr. John. Now, he is a very well published doctor, and he has interesting theories around traditional medicine and science specific to diabetes, cancer, and the science and importance of chewing. So, this episode really does showcase the importance of thinking critically in every field, not only when it comes to your country, your nation, and your global diversification options, but also when it comes to your health and wellness. So let's dive into today's episode.
Nicole, I thank you for having me, and I thank our audience for listening and seeing this podcast. I'm originally from India. I did my medical training there. Then I went to Scotland for a year of residency. I came to the United States in the year 1970, did my residency and fellowship, practiced. I went to Canada for a year, came back and practiced in the United States for over 30 years. At the age of 40, in 40s, when I got 40 plus, I started noticing weight gain during the winter months, and then I lose it in spring. So I said, okay, winter I'm not as active, and so I gain weight. But then in my 50s, I noticed that the weight I gained in the winter months is not going away in spring, it's staying. And of course, I was adding only 1 or 2 pounds each year. But then I started thinking, okay, I'm going to be in trouble unless I do something about it. So I read physiology textbooks to look at what is the signal that makes us wanting to eat. The signal is hunger. But we don't know when the body is going to create, when you are going to feel hungry next. Can anybody know? But how does the brain know when to create the sensation of hunger? I could not find answers in medical textbooks. Of course, everybody knows if your blood sugar goes down, you feel hungry. That is true. But if that is the only signal, why should a diabetic feel hungry ever? They have a high blood sugar. So that is not right. The second thing is, when you start eating, you don't always eat the same volume of food. You feel satisfied. If your stomach can hold, 1 liter, or in a child 8 to 12 ounce, you have to consume the same amount each time to feel satisfied, if fullness of the stomach is the criteria. But you don't always eat the same volume. You feel good. That means it is not the fullness. So what could it be? Again, medical textbooks don't have an answer. Just to give you another example, if you are thirsty, can you predetermine how much water will it take to quench your thirst? Each time you drink, the quantity is different. And by the time your thirst is quenched, the water is still in your stomach. It has not been absorbed into the body yet. How did the brain know you had enough water? And the third question I had was, evening, 4 hours after your meal, if you take your blood sugar will be high, your cholesterol, triglyceride, everything will be high. But next morning, everything comes back to normal or baseline. Where did they go? What happened to them? These are the three questions I could not find answers in the medical textbooks. So I came up with my own and published my first book, Eat, Chew, Live. So is that enough of a summary?
I'm curious. The first book you've published quite a few, is Eat, Chew, Live. Eat and live are very well talked about. Can you
Right.
talk a little bit more about chew, what this means, and why it's so important?
Excellent question. Excellent question. Now, suppose I blindfold you and give you something to drink. How would you know what you are drinking is water, wine, milk, soda? How would you know?
The taste?
The taste buds. What I am suggesting is, just like I used the example of water, drinking water when you are thirsty, the taste buds have two functions. Not only to let the brain know what you are consuming, the chemical nature of it, but also they are metering how much is going down. The brain already knows what your body is looking for in terms of thirst, how much water is deficit in the body. And the metering is telling the brain how much is going down. When there is a match, the brain creates a sensation of quenching. There is a similar mechanism for nutrients also. There are four basic tastes, five tastes, like sweetness, saltiness, bitterness, and flavor. Each of those create the signal to the brain, and the brain creates a sensation of reward by enjoyment if the body needs that nutrient. And the only way the taste buds can sense it is the nutrient has to become associated with the sensor or the receptor on the tongue. When you chew, you are releasing the nutrient so that it can become attached to the taste buds, and then the signal, then you are rewarded. Suppose you open your mouth when you're thirsty, you pour your water straight into your throat. What will happen? You will observe two things. One, you will drink more. Second, you will still not get the satisfaction unless you take a few sips.
Interesting.
So, in order to register the nutrients that you are consuming, you have to chew the food. Now, let me ask you another question. In nature, can you think of a food from which you can get an adult human can get nutrients from without chewing?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Off the top of my head, I can't.
Only thing you can say honey.
Honey.
Other than that, everything requires chewing. Why? That is why nature wanted to control or regulate the amount of food you consume. Wild animals, can you ever see an obese wild animal? Domesticated animals become as obese as their uh, owners. Why? So that's the importance of chewing, because the number one cause of obesity or weight gain, unneeded weight gain, is lack of chewing or eating foods that requires less chewing or no chewing. Blending, pureeing, soft foods. How much chewing you do? Once you stop chewing, you swallow. That's the number one cause. You
Wow.
watch anybody, how much time does it take to eat?
I've never thought about this. My next question is, what about smoothies? Because I love smoothies as a morning breakfast, and I do chew them, but I think most people don't chew them. They just like go down.
Well, that makes me the question. If you take a bite of food, what percentage of that do you really enjoy?
Yeah.
Give me a guess.
I would probably guess not much because you're not really focusing on what you're chewing.
Not only focusing on, you can, if you enjoy 15 to 20%, you are lucky. 80% of the food just goes over the taste buds. If the taste buds are already occupied with a nutrient, the rest just flows over it,
Huh.
just like putting water right straight into your throat.
And so, how do you get that full taste?
You eat, take small bites and chew them. So when you blend the food, when you puree the food, it just flows over the taste buds. Suppose you go to a grocery store and you're buying 10 items. There's a scanner. You put one item, the scanner takes it. Suppose you stack 10, how many will the scanner pick up? One at the bottom.
Hmm.
That is what you are doing when you eat without chewing.
Interesting. Very good analogy. Very good illustration. I can bet that probably everyone listening has never put it in that context before, and the importance of chewing not only I guess to taste the food, but do you get more nutrients out of the food when you're very mindful about the chewing, and do you find you can eat less food because you're chewing more? Does that make sense?
The quantity is less, it takes less food to have the same amount of enjoyment. So we can reduce the quantity. The second problem, along with lack of chewing, is the concentration. By that I mean mindful eating and conscious enjoyment of what you eat. Human brain cannot concentrate on two things at the same time. You can do multitasking, but if you are talking to me and if somebody else is talking to you at the same time, you have to make a choice. You cannot equally listen to both of them or both of us. So when you are eating, the taste buds are sending signals to your brain. If you are watching TV, which takes precedence, any signal from the eye is more value for the brain than from the mouth. So eating becomes automatic and you don't enjoy it. Half the food is gone by the time you know you're eating because you are concentrating on the TV or a movie or a game. Business travelers, if you combine your meeting with eating, your eating becomes just automatic, just finish the food. You're concentrating because that is important, that's your livelihood. You're concentrating on the presentation, the talk, the nuances, you're listening to your, and eating is just an act.
Interesting.
And you will end up, I had a patient who, shall I go on? Okay. He was very distraught on that day. So I asked him why. This is a routine appointment. And he said he was a diabetic. And his doctor wanted him to start on insulin. He was already on 3 different diabetic medications by mouth. And he did not want to start insulin. I asked him why. Because on that very day, his secretary was having her leg amputated. So I asked, was she in an accident? And he said, no, she was a diabetic, but she was on insulin, yet she had to have an amputation. And he said he is distressed because he has 2 boys in high school. He is a businessman. He has to travel and he needs his legs. He does not want to take insulin. Okay. So that was the situation. He asked me, okay, what can I do? I don't want to take this. So this is where I told him how to eat, what to eat. Then he said, oh, I travel all the time. I have to attend meetings. I eat what they provide. That is where I told him, if you combine meeting with eating, you are in trouble.
I am interested specific to business entrepreneurs traveling on the road, because I do find, especially when you're traveling so often every few days or every week, it is difficult, I find, to get the right nutrition. And for me, that's a big reason why I have slowed down my travels, is because I want to know what the local food is, where the supermarkets are, not just ordering food all the time and eating this fast food. But I'm also curious, so I'm curious some of your tips on that and what you have seen and some best practices, but I'm also curious to dive into, and I know you have written books, and a big area of your expertise is cancer and diabetes. And so I'm curious what you have seen throughout your career of what type of lifestyle somebody needs to live for this to start, because I feel like a lot of us think that we're living very healthy lifestyles, but then something unfortunate pops up and it's like, I thought I was doing all the right things. Is it what we're doing? Is it what's in our food? Like, what is causing that?
First of all, human beings live to the age of 80, 90, or 100 on every part of the globe, which means the same nutrients are available. You can move from one continent to another and still live a healthy life because there are local people living a healthy life. Human body needs 100 different nutrients, and you cannot get all of them from one meal or one food group. So you need a variety. The question is, how are the nutrients packaged? They are packaged in different shapes and sizes and tastes in different continents, but they all have the same nutrient. Only the packaging is different. So the first thing is, yes, whatever you need is available in the area where you are going to. You are not used to that particular, the mouthfeel, the taste, the combination. So it takes a little time to get used to the locally available food, to let your brain learn what nutrients are represented in what food. Let me give you an example. Suppose we go to a Chinese buffet, 100 items for lunch. How many would you choose? Tell me.
Not 100.
Okay, how many?
Maybe to eat, maybe 7 or 8 different
Let's
things.
say 6 to 8. On what basis? What is yours? There are 100. You have to choose 6. How do you choose those? What is the criteria?
I guess what I traditionally like to eat and then what looks good.
Okay. In other words, you have had previous experience with many of them. You know you enjoy them, you take them. And we sit down, we eat, we enjoy. Suppose we go back to the same buffet for supper. Okay? Will you take exactly the same items?
No, maybe some of the same, but I'd want to try something different as well.
Why? You enjoyed all 6 for lunch. Why do you change?
To try something new?
Why? Because the nutrients you got from lunch are still in your body, but the brain has got information that some other nutrients are needed now. And the brain, by the previous experience, knows which foods will contain the needed nutrients needed right now. So it sends a signal. The subconscious mind analyzes the food, the nutrient need, and the food availability, connects the two, send a message to the conscious brain. That looks more interesting, and I need to try that now. So the nature has provided us with all the requirements, just like the toddlers do. All you have to do is to watch a toddler, 2 to 6 years of age. They have no idea about nutrition, energy, food groups. Yet, they will eat only when they are hungry. They will pick and choose. And when they are satisfied, they could care less how much is left on the plate. They grow up normally. And we all did that when we were toddlers. Why can't we do it now?
Are you a fan of the show and tune in weekly? From one global citizen to another, I would greatly appreciate you leaving a review for the show on your favorite podcast platform. Leaving a positive review not only makes my day, but also helps others find this podcast as well. Be sure to leave a review right now on your favorite podcast platform. Thank you, and let's get back into the episode. I would have never Never thought that that was the reason because my body needed a different set of nutrients from the science side of things. That's really interesting to know. And I think that is an interesting point to bring up for the listeners where every part of the world has the nutrients that your body needs. It's really just when you're in a new culture, you're traveling somewhere new, finding those nutrients. And so, how do you identify like these are because I'm just thinking of myself, not coming from a science, medical, nutrition background. I don't really know the nutrients that my body needs. I think we all assume it's fruits, vegetables, meat, and fish. And so, is it kind of if you eat those core things and you're getting the nutrients that you need?
Yes, even if you know first of all, there is no science right now to tell you when you sit down to eat what exact nutrients your body is needing. The nutrient needs are changing minute by minute based on which organ is active, which nutrients are being used, and all that. Secondly, the nutrient content of the food you are going to be eating, you have no clue. There is no analysis to tell you exactly what nutrient food is. And thirdly, every nutrient, our body has some reserve in storage. How much is the balance there? If you go to a supermarket, you can on the shelf, you scan it, and then the computer will tell you how much is back in the back room in storage. So you can match it. Only your subconscious mind or brain will know those. Your conscious brain has no clue. So you cannot match it. All you have to do is to think about teaching your brain what new foods you are going to be eating. And the brain takes a little time. So the first time it's the curiosity. What is the new food in a new place, new country, new ingredients? But pretty soon you will learn which one do you enjoy. The reward for taking the nutrient the body needs is the sense of enjoyment. If you are all no, so what is your favorite food? Tell me.
I really like fish.
Fish. Okay. Suppose you had to go for a dinner party, there was no fish available, you ate, you are fully satisfied. Then I bring you the plate of fish that you enjoy. Will you eat it at that time and enjoy it as much?
No.
No. So that is the key. The brain will reward you with enjoyment if the nutrients in that food are needed at that time. That is what the toddlers are using. The first bite you take when you are hungry is so good. After a few minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, the intensity of enjoyment is not as much. So if you are already satiated, even your favorite food is not enjoyable. The degree of enjoyment, by the way, and enjoying your meal is one of the few pleasures in life that you can enjoy from birth, from within hours of birth to the end of your life. There is no other enjoyment that you can have multiple times a day. Tell me something else. None. But we are not using it properly. We are abusing it. That is the number one problem. So if you eat, everybody enjoys eating, but we don't enjoy what we eat.
And that reminds me, and I've never had this experience before, only once in my life. Unfortunately, I think a lot of us probably had this experience during lockdown when I contracted a specific virus that many of us had. And it was the first time in my life that I could not taste what I was eating. And I had never experienced that before. And for it was like 5 or 6 days. It wasn't long, but I just remember saying, like, all I'm going to eat and all I ate was apples and eggs because I was like, it doesn't matter what I'm eating. And I didn't realize how much enjoyment was gone when I couldn't taste what I was eating.
Exactly. That tells you you cannot control the nutrient or you cannot satisfy the nutrient needs of the body without a sense of enjoyment which comes from taste. So that again explains why the word chew is there.
So I'm curious, bringing processed foods into the mix here. I'm curious, do processed foods have a way of masking, in a sense, our need for the nutrients that we're eating?
Yes, but it is not the processing per se that I am concerned about. Two things. One is, does the processing reduce the amount of chewing or the need for chewing? Then it is a problem. The quantity control becomes difficult. Even more important is almost all processed foods contain too much sodium or salt. And to show the importance of that, suppose I bring you a cucumber which is very bitter. How do you take the bitterness out of cucumber? You cut it up and put it in salt. It will reduce the bitterness. Why? How does it do that? Because sodium interferes with the signal transmission of the taste buds for bitter sensation. It reduces the intensity of transmission and you feel like the bitterness is gone. But the chemicals that produce bitterness are still there. It is the signal transmission is reduced. So the intensity of experience is reduced. So if you add salt to the food, what you are enjoying is the saltiness, not the nutrient-induced enjoyment. And the body is very sensitive about the salinity of blood or the sodium concentration, because every signal transmission in the nerve cells depends on maintaining proper sodium balance. So in order to keep the sodium in perspective, the body will retain more water. Your blood volume will go up, your blood pressure will go up, and the signal transmission will be reduced. You will end up needing more because the salinity of the saliva will be higher. So in order to taste salt, you have to increase the salt content even more. In short, you get addicted to more and more salty foods. Imagine, look at the airport. Every child is running around with a bag of potato chips, which is salty or other. And from childhood onwards, they are getting conditioned by higher and higher salty foods. So this is the problem. The processed foods, the less chewing and more saltiness.
With having more processed foods, more salt, are those factors that we just talked about one of the biggest reasons that you see why so many disease is on the rise in recent decades versus a century ago?
Yes, about 60 years ago, we had the agricultural revolution, the green revolution. Then we had the industrial revolution and the chemical revolution, producing a lot of fertilizers, and farming became mechanized. Now, then came the processing of the food, the packaging, the distribution. All of this favors a consumption of egg food just for enjoyment, not for nutrition. It's a convenient thing. If you're stressed, you eat. If you're anxious, you eat. If you're bored, you eat. So eating became the solution for many of the problems. And now, my biggest problem is grains were never meant for humans. Otherwise, we would have had beaks to pick them up and the ability to digest the chaff. We don't. But because of the agricultural revolution and the chemical revolution, grain farming became the cheapest way to feed an increasing number of people. Every government in the world subsidizes either grain farming or fertilizer or free food with food ration cards or meals on wheels, and almost all of them are made with grains or grain flour. 100 years ago, the amount of food energy humans consumed from complex carbohydrates was less than 35% of daily total food energy intake. Now, in developed countries, it is 50%. In developing countries, it is 70%. If I boil some rice and give it to you, will you enjoy eating that by itself? Why not?
It's bland.
What does it tell you? The nature have nutrients. If there is nutrient value, it creates a sensation of enjoyment when that comes into your mouth. The nature says grains, the complex carbohydrate, there are no receptor to note it. Why? Because the body doesn't need it. Body needs very little glucose. Most of the daily energy that you spend, that energy is not produced from glucose, but from fatty acid. Glucose is just a kindling agent. It starts the fire, and the body uses the fatty acid to keep burning to produce energy. That is why the body does not have a lot of place to store glucose as glucose or glycogen. Any excess is converted into fat and stored as fat. Now, here comes the next critical. Suppose the fat stores are full. What will the body do with the excess glucose coming in from the grains? If after a meal containing a lot of carbohydrates from grains, your blood sugar will go up. That will stimulate the pancreas to release insulin, and the insulin will go with the glucose to every cell in the body. Do you know what insulin does? If you live in an apartment or a house, how do you know there is somebody outside coming to visit you? How do you know?
The doorbell.
Either the doorbell or they knock. Then you know. But you still have the option to let that person in or not. That is in your control. Every cell can use glucose to produce energy. But glucose has no doorbell to ring. That is the role of insulin. Insulin rings the doorbell to let the cell know glucose is outside. If you need it, the cell has to send a wagon to the door, open the door, load up the wagon, and bring it in. Okay? So insulin does not get inside the cell. It only informs the cell. Suppose the cell has enough glucose and fatty acids are there to produce energy, but there is plenty of glucose outside because you just had a big meal of rice. Insulin is knocking on the door, but the cell does not respond. Do you know what diabetologists call it? Insulin resistance. But the fact is, the cell is functioning normally. The cell says, just like the fish that you refused to eat because you were already full, the cell does not want it because it doesn't need it. But they claim that the cell is not responding to insulin, so and then what do they give you? They give you a prescription for insulin. If you are allergic to a medication, resistant to a medication, will the doctor give you the same medication? So if you are resistant to insulin, why are they giving you insulin?
So are you saying that not completely, but grains and wheat is a big driver for eventually over, I assume, years' time for becoming diabetic?
60 years ago, we had the Green Revolution. 15 years later, we started the obesity epidemic. 10 years later, we have the diabetic epidemic. Now we are on the cancer epidemic. And the next will be dementia and Alzheimer's. They are all connected to the same thing, the agricultural revolution and the increased intake of grains and grain-based foods. Yes, they are all connected.
I have heard from others very briefly that Alzheimer's, dementia is, what are they calling it? Like the type 3 diabetes, and caused from similar causes of type 2 diabetes.
Well, there are two different definitions of type 3. In the classical medical definition, type 3 comes from, it happens in people who had their pancreas removed for surgical procedures, either cancer or something like that, and their inability to produce insulin based on how much pancreas was removed. So that is the real type 3. Now, people who have Alzheimer's is almost always associated with high blood sugar. And some people coined the term type 3 for Alzheimer's, saying that the brain cells are not responding to insulin. They are becoming resistant to insulin. But the fact is, each nerve cell, the insulin never comes in contact with nerve cells because insulin does not get into the fluid. The whole brain can be considered as one single cell. Now, to understand that, each cell is an independent living unit, each cell in the body. And each cell can decide on its own what nutrients to let in or, okay? And insulin, again, as we mentioned, it informs the brain and the cell of the availability of glucose, and the cell decides. But when it comes to the brain as a whole is covered with fluid. So whatever nutrients get into the fluid, what's called the cerebrospinal fluid, that is available to every cell. Each cell has to, the nutrients are outside, it can let in or not. Insulin has nothing to do with it. So the whole brain can be considered as a one single cell. So if there is insulin resistance causing Alzheimer's, every nerve cell should be affected, and all nerve cells are not affected. Only the cognitive part or memory part are involved. Why? So that negates the whole question of type 3 diabetic there, right there. Now, the very interesting part is, you heard of insulin resistance, right? Have you ever heard of a test to measure the degree of insulin resistance? Why? Because there is no such thing as insulin resistance. It is an explanation. It looks like insulin, just like the fish. If you don't eat the fish because you're already full, can I tell you are resisting feeding?
I've never heard this before.
That is what the endocrinologists are trying to claim. The cell is resisting. They don't consider whether the cell needs it or not. That's immaterial. So it is based on an explanation. The resistance to insulin is an explanation, not a fact. There is no test to measure it because it doesn't exist. It is a calculated number.
Yeah.
If it is a real one, in every science, before a hypothesis is accepted, it has to go through 3 steps: logic, mechanism, and measurement. Human body has 200 different types of cell in the body. But endocrinologists or diabetologists claim only 3 become resistant to insulin: liver, fat, and muscle. Why? How did they pick those 3? There's no test. They just picked the 3 because it will explain the laboratory findings in diabetics. So the logic is not there. And liver has millions of cells. Each cell is an independent living unit. Who is coordinating and telling the liver, okay, from tomorrow you are not going to respond to insulin? Let's assume you live in an apartment complex, 200 units. One day, 3 independent apartments decide we are not going to respond to the postman from tomorrow. We won't allow him to deliver our mail. How does it make sense? They don't communicate with each other. They just decide. Take a young lady who is pregnant, no family history of diabetes, no personal history of diabetes. At 8th week of gestation, she's diagnosed diabetic. Why? How did it happen? So these are the unanswered questions. So type 2 diabetes is not logical. It's not a logical disease. Now, what is the mechanism? Do The resistance to insulin in liver cell, is it the same mechanism as in the muscle, as in the liver or fat tissue? Nobody knows. They don't have a mechanism. Is it the doorbell not ringing, or is the transporter, the wagon is not working, or is the nucleus is not responding? We don't know. And third, as I mentioned, there is no measurement. So it fails in the logic test, the mechanism test, and the measurement test. Yet, if you speak long enough and loud enough, people will become to believe it.
I've never heard that before, quite honestly. And I think it's very interesting because I do very much so believe, and even with what we do in the business, that whatever is a convenient answer for corporations, for governments, for pharmaceutical companies, definitely is something that is pushed, the narrative that is pushed a lot of the time, especially in bigger governments like the US, like Canada. And so that's a really interesting theory. And I guess there's no answer right now, but if science thinks it has an answer and there's a solution that involves billions of dollars being made, that's probably a good enough answer for them.
That is what I have been fighting for the last 20 years. How to, unless the consumer, unless we start asking questions, there is no need for them to answer, because they make you believe that you are doing the right thing. But if you look at people who are taking insulin, even if they keep all the advertisements for diabetic medications will come to one thing: it will bring your blood sugar down. But it will not tell you whether it will stop your kidney damage, your vision damage, it will prevent heart attack or Alzheimer's or amputation of your leg. No, it will bring the sugar down. What good is it if it does not stop the complications of diabetes? Unless we ask. So that is all I'm interested in. We have to keep asking. So similarly, the business person, when you are traveling, you need nutrients, you need food, but eating and enjoyment of eating is one pleasure that is yours. Don't mix it with anything else. If there is food in your mouth, you cannot concentrate on something else. So take your bite in between, or eat before and then. So if you are in a position to set up your business meetings, have the first 20 minutes just for the enjoyment of eating. Then continue so people can concentrate on enjoying, and then they can concentrate on the message. If you combine the two, one will not be as effective, or each will not be as effective as you would like it to be. And you will get more out of the people. Let them enjoy the meal and then concentrate rather than mixing it up. Now, when you travel, always make sure, taste the food locally available, but don't eat a large quantity at the first time. Take small amounts, taste it, enjoy it, and see which one you like, because your brain will tell you what do you need at that time. Experiment with variety. And therein comes the use of spices. The spices contain a lot of micronutrients, fiber-associated nutrients, that you may not get from the regular food because are in the same field over and over and over. The nutrient quantity or quality will be reduced. So spices can make that up and help you get more nutrients that your body needs. So enjoy the local food as much as possible when you are in a place, and use the spices, taste it, enjoy it, but keep in mind that is your time. Don't mix it with anything else. That's not company's time. That is your time.
I have heard that about spices before, so I think it's fascinating that you bring that up again. My last quick question to you, when we were speaking about diabetes and I guess the lack of research that there is on it, Is this something that other countries and cultures have figured out and are looking into? I guess when you're talking about US centric and what they're thinking diabetes is coming from, other solutions of where diabetes is coming from, that they're aware of this? Or is this really the narrative globally surrounding diabetes?
Once the diabetologists got the concept of insulin resistance into medical textbooks, that narrative became the global narrative, because that is what I learned in my medical school. That is years ago, almost 60 years ago. Okay. And that narrative has gotten stronger because now there are global organizations promoting the same thing. There are certified diabetes educators promoting the same thing. And nobody has asked for proof, because the pharmaceutical companies and the glucose monitoring device manufacturers, they benefit. The dietetic associations, they support it. They cannot question it. The certified diabetes educators, they cannot ask the question because their livelihood depends on promoting the same thing. So it is the same all over the world. Now, if you go to every country, there are local remedies to control blood sugar. If the illness has only one reason or cause, how can you have multiple remedies or regional remedies for the same illness? That means there is something wrong with the basic concept of that disease.
And it's interesting too that you mentioned that different cultures don't necessarily always just use big pharma medicine to control it. There's local remedies that are not industrialized to the degree that they are in the US and monetized to that degree that are still keeping it under control. Really interesting. I mean, I'm curious if your message and mission around this will come to light at some point in the future on a global scale.
Well, that is where I need help from people like you, because your curiosity is what keeps me going. Because
Hmm.
I cannot reach the audience directly, but through people like you, we can spread the message. And all I am asking is take charge of your own health. When the doctor gives you a medication, ask, what do you expect as a result of this medication? What is our objective in treating? Especially if you have high blood sugar. If you take insulin, the blood sugar goes down. Where does that sugar go? Most people think it went out of the body. No. If you take insulin, insulin forces the liver to convert that glucose into fat. So the blood sugar goes down, the diabetologist is happy, your doctor is happy, but it is the fat that blocks the artery. It is the fat that causes the kidney disease, the eye disease, the heart attack, the stroke. So instead of having glucose associated problem, now you have fat associated problem. So what does the doctor do? He gives you a cholesterol medication. And then the maker will say, oh, all you have to do is check the number and you can control it. If you check your temperature, can you control your temperature just by checking it? But that is what the gadget maker wants you to believe. You should have it. And I had to argue with people who are scientifically oriented or scientists.
Well, this has been a really enlightening discussion, and I really appreciate you coming on and sharing what you've learned throughout decades of your career and challenging the traditional narrative that really, at the end of the day, is in Western culture at least a money making, industrialized narrative. It's really interesting, just as a last thought. I'm not usually in Canada, I'm from Canada. I've been here for a few weeks and I'm heading out next week, but I'm usually in Asia or Latin America. And I have seen so many advertisements, both on US and Canadian TV, for medical drugs. And these advertisements, I mean, you don't see them nearly to the degree, if almost ever, in Asia or Latin America on TV. But not only are they advertising the drug, it's a little bit about the drug and then the rest of the commercial, all of these wild side effects. And I'm just thinking, like, why is this something that you even want to take? But regardless of that, it's just the narrative of pharmaceuticals, drugs. It's so normalized in the culture here. And I'm so surprised to see it at least once or twice, if not more, every commercial break.
That is the culture. Unless you start asking, you cannot change it. Now, I'm not anti-medicine. Don't get me for that. For people who have illnesses, they do need medical help. Okay, if you have a localized cancer, for example, you need to have it surgically removed, or that can create problems. That by itself is yet another topic if we get into cancer. But I'll give you just one thought on that, if I may. Every cancer starts with one single cell, the cancer stem cell. Stem cell is the mother cell that produces baby cells. Now, can you think of a normal stem cell that produces multiple cells in a controlled fashion? When you look in the mirror, you are looking at the product of one single stem cell. And that cell is formed when the ovum is fertilized by a sperm.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know where that fertilization takes place? It does not take place in the womb. It takes place in the fallopian tube as the ovum is rolling down. And it's a 6-day journey to reach the womb. By the time, it's called the zygote now, or an embryo, by the time it reaches the uterus, you know how many cells are in there? 200. While it was rolling down, it was dividing. The cell was dividing and dividing and dividing. How did it know how to divide? Who taught this embryo to divide? And then, do you know why there are 200? Because there are 200 different types of systems or organs or cells in the body. Each one becomes a mother cell, a stem cell, to create all these organs. And these are precisely controlled. But all it takes is one stem cell not listening to the control, not obeying the control, and it keeps on multiplying. And what do you have? You have cancer. So on the one hand, you have a controlled multiplication. We have two kidneys, both similar size, both have similar number of cells. How can that happen? They stop at that time. But when it comes to cancer, that control is gone.
That's really interesting. And I do really appreciate you coming on the show I mean, what we do is we really try to cultivate critical thinking in every area of life. And so that's why I'm very interested to hear your perspective on critical thinking within the medical community, because that's not at all what we do, but really critically thinking about your life, your government, what you want the future to look like. And then, of course, health and wellness comes into play into that as well. So thank you for being here. Very, very insightful, interesting information that you're bringing to light. Where can people find you and your books?
Well, I have published 6 books, and all of them are available on Amazon. Or people can go to my website, drjohnonhealth.com. And just to come back to your basic idea of work, wealth, and travel, the people who are working, first they have to take care of their physical health, then only they can continue to be productive. And for that, they need to eat a balanced diet. A balanced diet comes from a variety, not the quantity. Let your brain tell you what your body needs. Listen to your brain. For that, all you have to do is to concentrate on the enjoyment of eating. Eat foods that need chewing. Chew the food. Enjoy it. When the degree of enjoyment goes down, stop it. Now, your physical body needs exercise. Exercise doesn't have to be continuous. Your infirmity depends more on the time you don't spend exercise. The longer you are sedentary, the higher your chance of infirmity. In other words, it doesn't matter what type of exercise you do, keep moving. Don't just sit there. Even just walk inside the hotel room where you are. You can go up and down. You don't have to sit down and watch. You're listening to the news. Just walk around. Go around the chair. Go around the table, wherever. Just keep moving. Then when you are traveling, travel in comfort. But even if the food is free, you don't have to eat the whole thing. So keep reminding yourself you have a physical body and a mental health. And to prevent, and one last thing, reduce the amount of salt that you are consuming. Because to me, if you put too much salt, you are essentially pickling. And I believe the increasing incidence of dementia, the primary feature of dementia is your brain shrinks. In a CT scan, you can see the shrinkage. You know why? I believe the salt outside is bringing the fluid down out of the nerve cells. Then you are literally pickling your brain.
You've just listened to the Work, Wealth, and Travel podcast. If anything from this episode resonated with you, I'd appreciate if you share this podcast on your socials. And of course, be sure to tag us at Work, Wealth, and Travel. And don't forget to leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. Thank you for joining us on this global citizen journey, and we'll see you in the next episode.